Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into the world of Forza 4 for a vehicle which I have discussed a few times on the channel. I discussed it in my 20 vehicles that need to return to Forza countdown, and I also featured it in my personal Gran Turismo 7 wishlist, and kind of spoiler alert, it is also going to feature in my top 50 favourite cars in the world list relatively soon. Now, this car, the Devon GTX, is, as I've mentioned before, of course based on, in part at least, the Viper. Now, the Viper is a great base to work from, as we've seen numerous times, not just from this car, but even the Bristol Fighter, for instance, which we also discussed on the channel, is another excellent example of what the Viper is capable of when it's taken not necessarily completely out of its comfort zone, but certainly out of its initially intended purpose, and repurposed for something else, something that's much more of an exclusive supercar. And just like the Bristol Fighter, that's exactly what the Devon represents. Now, being a Viper and having a Viper engine, a newer, in fact the newest generation Viper engine, it's an 8.4 litre V10 of course, you're expecting good numbers, and that's exactly what you get. 650 naturally aspirated horses, 586 pound-feet of torque, and the weight is also pretty good, actually, 1,451 kilos. That's quite a lot lighter, actually, than a lot of other supercars, which you might assume are lighter than this. Now, the horsepower per tonne doesn't sound massive, it's 448, but that's pretty good. For a car that has no way near, say, the magic 1,000 horsepower, for instance, that's pretty good. Now, the price of this car on Forza 4 is 300,000 credits, which places it quite well against stuff such as the Gumper Apollo and the Ascari KZ1R. It's not the most affordable car of this kind of category. The Ultima GTR is a very difficult one to beat in that kind of realm, but even something like an R35 from Nissan, it's going to take some beating for that kind of value for money. However, the great thing about the Devon GTX is that not only in a game but also in the real world, this is a proven car. Now, it doesn't hold an official lap record at Laguna Seca, but as I have mentioned before, this car does hold a record. It's an unofficial one, but it holds a record, and it is recognised by a number of sites who list the best lap times on Laguna Seca as being an eligible car. Now, it has been beaten since, not just by race cars of course, but by road cars as well. In fact, since it set its record way back in 2009, which funnily enough is not that far off a decade ago, which is pretty crazy to think about, it was the quickest street car around Laguna Seca. But no longer. It has been beaten since by quite a few other vehicles, McLarens, various newer Corvettes, even the Viper ACR has since beaten it. However, to put it into some perspective so that you can appreciate how good this car is even in real life, the lap time that it set around Laguna Seca is just over a 1:35, fractionally over. That is around 3 seconds quicker than a Nissan GT-R Nismo. That's pretty impressive. In fact, that's very impressive, given how fast the Nismo is around a track and how that's kind of the whole point of the car. So for this to beat that, that's pretty cool. Now, what do you actually get in terms of in-game performance? Because being a Viper-powered car, you can expect certain things, but just like how the Bristol Fighter actually turns out to be a considerably different car to a Viper, for instance, it's a lot easier to drive, the gearing is considerably different, the acceleration is slower, but the top speed is higher. It's an altogether different car. So how does the Devon compare? Well, interestingly, it is different to the Bristol, which of course you'd hope it would be, in that it is much closer to a Viper. The Devon GTX, at least in the game, feels very much like the Viper that it has the underpinnings of. You can tell almost, to be fair, even without knowing, that it does have something to do with the Viper. You can feel that kind of raw ability, let's say, that the Viper has. In particular, the newer models, and more specifically the ACR, is a great example of how this car feels. It's relatively stiff through corners, not much of a tail-happy nature, perhaps surprisingly, but at the same time it's a car which responds very well when it's pushed hard. It can put down great lap times, and it responds very, very well to tuning, just like, once again, a Viper does. The Viper is a great base to work from for both motorsport and just straight line speed, In a similar way to the Corvette engine and the Corvette chassis have been the basis of some of the greatest performance cars in the world, including, of course, the one that I always go back to, the Mosler MT900, which is, of course, also on the game. And I would say that the Devon is to the Viper's potential what the Mosler is to the Corvette's potential. It really shows what amazing things can be done with that tech. Because the Corvette and the Viper are both cars which people who don't have an appreciation for American cars can very easily view as blunt objects, sledgehammers, if you will. In fact, one of the Corvettes was even called that, of course, but was a rather quick car to kind of make up for it. The Viper, very easy to view as a hot rod, but it's so much more than that, and cars like this just go to show that. I personally am a huge fan of the Devon now, to the point where, as I said, it is in my top 50 favourite vehicles in the world list, and we'll get to that in due time. But as far as it goes on Forza 4, this is a car which I'm not surprised wasn't included again. I do hope that it comes back to the Horizon games, because it's a perfect eligible car for that kind of high-powered street racing, which the Viper is so great for. Because the Viper is a great track car, but it's really the road accessibility of its performance, which also allows it to be great as an all-rounder. It's not just a track car, it's great on the road and the track, whereas something like a Mosler, for instance, or a Noble, they can do it on the road, but they really need a track to show what they're fully capable of. The Viper is kind of the best of both worlds. In a similar way again to the Corvette, some of course more than others. The ZR1 is a perfect example, great on the road, great on the track. And as far as this one goes overall, I don't think there's a huge chance of it coming back. I would love to see it come back, but I think many people probably wouldn't really care. If it did, I'd be very happy, but don't hold your breath anytime soon for this car to make a return. Production was troubled, which doesn't help, of course, having it back in the game. And the only glimmer of light, I would say, is that now that the Viper has kind of died, that could allow this car to be more eligible for a return. But still, don't get your hopes up for that. However, that's it for this pick overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time. It's definitely worth checking out this car if you do go back to Forza 4. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.